So yesterday I stumbled across a live stream that Aaron the Pedantic was putting on the subject of paladins, and it was a novel experience seeing people react excitedly to the sudden presence of total party skills in their chat. I find it a little funny that I'd been there for a while and had been using my older account, the King Waspinator Vault, to say a few things, and hadn't really had much reaction or anyone like realizing it was me, despite the fact that I start pretty much every video saying, "Hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator." Are there a lot of other King Waspinator themed channels out there? If so, that's unique, and I'm perhaps owed a little money, because I feel I can go back through the great internet database that's being kept on file somewhere on YouTube and find some sort of proof that, King Waspinator actually has a little bit of a history. And it's all me, baby. It's all me. So anyway, there's some things said in that chat. Some lifelong enemies were made that day. Vendettas that can never be dropped. And assaults to one's honor and character, the likes of which I have never seen before on the face of this earth. Or, some shit like that. Some minor disagreements about the whole nature of paladins and how they're portrayed. Right off the bat, I kind of would just generally say a few things about 5th edition paladins, is that these aren't paladins. They're called paladins. But, the whole basis of their power and the thing that makes them different than just a knight, I guess, is that, they've sworn some sort of, like, oath. Although, like, IRL, that is kind of what makes a knight more than just a regular soldier, is that they've sworn some sort of special oath of protection or service or whatever to a lord or a religious organization and all that kind of stuff. Not every culture uses the word knight because every culture is a little different and we all use different languages, so it would be weird if we had the exact same terminology for everything. But, paladins as they are, I do feel like in terms of like game usage, for 5th edition in particular, since it's more oath-based and less of like a holy crusader kind of a thing, that it used to kind of be, I feel like there should be some wiggle room allowed in how it's used. I mean, not every setting, paladins or knights don't necessarily fit in, but as a class build and framework to build a character upon, it could still function within that setting. Just sometimes you might have to change paladin to samurai or Mameluke or something like that. But like I said, though, these aren't really paladins. This is not what people think about when they think of paladins. They're not thinking about some guy who's like sworn to vengeance or, any of the other myriad little things they've done, none of which should go along with the classic vibe of paladins. When people think of paladins, they're thinking of this. They're thinking of AD&D. If you go on what the historical reference of what paladins really are supposed to be in the real world, I know, taboo sentence there, but I guess just deal with it for the sake of argument here. Paladins were just a specific group of knights that served a specific king once upon a time. Because of how Charlemagne has been lauded in history as like being a vital figure and all that, to a certain degree, his special cadre of knights have been kind of exalted in legendary. But they were just knights. I don't believe there's anything about them being able to lay on hands or turn into an angel form or anything like that. So, the classic holy warrior thing that you find in AD&D is not quite a historic depiction of paladins. Probably the closest to that, I'm going to still say, is the Palladium Fantasy role-playing game Paladin, which is basically just a more hardcore knight with a few slight differences in training, more strict rules that they have to adhere to. And they do come with a demon death blow, so like they can like focus themselves and do extra damage to supernatural evil and all that kind of stuff. But historically speaking, like, these paladins are actually what, like, a historic paladin would have been like in a fantasy environment still. The way I describe the classic Paladin that stretched from throughout the various editions of AD&D and, you know, arguably the first two Wizards of the Coast versions of D&D, they're really more Arthurian knights. They have chivalric values and all that kind of stuff. That you could kind of be said as like mixed in with like they're channeling the powers of the Holy Grail. In D&D terms, that ends up being attached to you know, various good god cults that are to be found in whatever D&D setting you're using. But in terms of like the presentation of their power set, I feel that's kind of really what the actual concept is. They're being called paladins because they were an elite group of knight associated with a great, you know, Christian king of history and all that kind of stuff. But like the way they're actually operating, you know, in terms of like how they're written, is they're really more like Camelot, Knights of the Round Table kind of knights who are imbued with the power of the Holy Grail that they are seeking in Arthurian legend. Even in 5th edition, like, you know, as some of the guys there during the stream were doing, they're looking at, like, you know, some of the upper level powers you get as a paladin in this version, and they all like really sound strangely divinely derived, despite the fact that these paladins are detached from, like, you know, religious providence. I mean, in the end, as with all these things, this is supposed to be a generic game. So, like I said, in terms of how you actually are using the functionality of just the skeleton that is the class build that is Paladin, you should have wiggle room in how you want to interpret that. Because sometimes there are going to be settings where, you know, Holy Crusader Knight just doesn't really fit the vibe of what you're going for. So you either have to leave it out entirely, or you can still leave it as an option for your players. You just find something that's more setting appropriate that still has the same vibe. Any kind of elite, top-tier warrior who has some sort of whiff of divine providence about them in some form or another, you know, can work with a paladin regardless of your edition of D&D that you're going for. It's a big wide world and a lot of stories to tell in it, boys. I guess that's all I really essentially have to say, just to kind of clarify some of my points. As I say, though, I guess my thing of saying, like, you know, Palladium kind of circumvents all that just by going back to, like, the original actual historic template of these are just knights plus. And not this weird invention of fiction. I guess, like, paladins might not be as an extreme an example of it, but in some ways they do the same thing that a lot of D&D classes seem to do, where they seem to be based on some sort of historical fiction archetype, but there's things about it that have been added and changed over the years of the game that kind of, I don't know. I mean, like, what is the standard archetypical paladin, if not historic paladins? What is the fictional reference that this is then based upon? Is it all because of that Paladin in Hell adventure, or is it what, like I'm saying, they're kind of like the name is just being put upon this Arthurian stereotype, and that Arthurian stereotype, in order to be able to channel the concept of, like, you know, the healing powers of the Holy Grail, instead of having a Holy Grail be an aspect of their character, instead they have the powers of the Holy Grail themselves within them. And it also leans into all the stuff about, like, lawful good and all that kind of, and I don't know, in terms of whether or not you should be able to have paladins of chaotic nature, probably not. I don't mind the idea of evil anti-paladins, aside from the fact that I do feel like they should have completely different power sets than good aligned lawful paladins. But I do feel like that lawful should always be the common denominator. Clearly, paladins cannot be neutral. I do think we can all agree on that, right? Lawful or not. So anyway, I guess that's that. Do the things and all the things that I normally talk about at the end of these videos, and see you, Waspa Nation, later. You over here.